Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, kindly give a very warm welcome to the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwunmi Adesina.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Alassane Ouattara, the President of Côte d'Ivoire, represented by His Excellency, Tiémoko Meyliet Koné, Vice-President of Côte d'Ivoire. Your Excellency, Nana Akufo-Ado, President of Ghana. Your Excellency, Saleh Zouida, President of Ethiopia, and my very dear big sister. Your Excellency, Emerson Mnangagwa, President of Zimbabwe. I used to live in Zimbabwe many, many years ago. We are delighted that Zimbabwe is back, and we will work to get it back fully. Your Excellency, Joel Howard Taylor, Vice President of Liberia. Your Excellency, Philip Mpango, Vice President of Tanzania. Your Excellency, Jose Ulysses Correa da Silva, Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. Your Excellency, Patrick Achi, my dear brother, Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire. Honorable ministers representing heads of state and government, and there are 13 of you, so it's difficult for me to go through all the names, but thank you for being here. Honorable Nelly Kaba, Minister of Planning and Development of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, and the Governor of the African Development Bank Group, and I have a way of always calling her Madame la Force Tranquille, si vous êtes là, on est tranquille. Honorable ministers, Your Excellency, President of the ECOWAS Commission, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and heads of diplomatic missions, presidents, and chief executives of the Africa Investment Forum partner institutions, Professor Benedict Orama, President of the Africa Export-Import Bank, Malam Samaila Subairu, CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, Alain Ebobise, CEO of Africa 50, Patrick Lamini, CEO of the Development Bank of South Africa, Wana Hoyer, President of the European Investment Bank, Dr. Mohammed El-Jazar, President of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and Admasu Tadesse, President, Trade and Development Bank. Thank you very much for your partnership. Heads of international organizations that are here, investors from around the world, of course, my own executive directors are the African Development Bank Group, led by the Dean of the Board, Dean Zayed of Egypt, senior management and staff of the African Development Bank, and all the Africa Investment Forum partner institutions, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and of course, my own dear and beautiful wife and friend, Grace. I will not be here without Grace, so give it up for my wife. Thank you. Is she beautiful? Good morning. I am delighted to welcome you all to the Africa Investment Forum 2022. It is especially gratifying that we are holding this forum physically. It is a long way from when we planned it last year and had to postpone it due to COVID-19. Thanks to the wider vaccination globally and the greater levels as well in Africa, we can now meet physically. I will speak now in French, so please change your...
I would want to thank His Excellency, President Ouattara, our host, and my big brother, my dear big brother, for his legendary hospitality and generosity, which made it possible for this event to take place here. You kindly accepted to host this in-person forum this year, and you lent your invaluable assistance to the organization and hosting arrangements for this event. Mr. President, I would want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I would also want to take the opportunity, Mr. President, to commend and thank your Vice President, your Prime Minister, Mr. Patrick Ashi, and the Minister of Planning and Development, Mrs. Nyale Kaba, for their exceptional support, commitment, and facilitation efforts.
Warm welcome to you, Your Excellencies, for being here despite your very heavy schedules. Your presence here today galvanizes us. It shows that African heads of state and government recognize that the future of Africa lies in investments, not in aid. President Nana Akufo-Ado of Ghana is right when he says Africa beyond aid. Your Excellencies, Africa beyond aid is an Africa driven by investments. I warmly welcome all the investors from around the world for being here. You are here with one purpose in mind: to seek opportunities for investments in Africa, to prospect, to identify, and to invest in bankable projects. You are in the right place, Africa. Africa has shown tremendous resilience, recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Foreign direct investments in Africa that had declined from $47 billion in 2019 to $40 billion in 2020 because of COVID-19 had picked up. Africa recovered in 2021 as foreign direct investment rose to $83 billion, doubling the flows in 2020. Africa is the place to be. Just think of the following. By 2050, Africa will account for over 1/4 of the world's population. Africa has the largest sources of renewable energy in the world. Africa has 65% of the uncultivated arable land left to feed 9 billion people in the world. And guess what? The future of electric cars in the world depends on Africa because it has the largest sources of cobalt in the world, with massive sources of lithium in Zimbabwe, Namibia, Ghana, Mali, and Democratic Republic of Congo. The African Continental Free Trade Area is the largest free trade zone in the world, connecting economies worth $3.3 trillion. So, Africa cannot be ignored. If you're not investing in Africa, think again. Africa is the investment frontier in the world, today and in the future. Invest in Africa today. Benefit from its great future. The Africa Investment Forum, Africa's premier investment marketplace, helps to connect investors to Africa. 4 years ago, we began a journey together. The African Development Bank, the Africa Export-Import Bank, the Trade and Development Bank, the Africa Finance Corporation, the Development Bank of South Africa, the European Investment Bank, the Islamic Development Bank Group, and Africa 50, when we jointly established the Africa Investment Forum. It was a journey to mobilize investments for Africa, a journey to showcase Africa, a journey to say to the world, Africa is bankable. The Africa Investment Forum is delivering amazing investments for Africa. In 4 years since the forum commenced in 2018, it has helped to mobilize $110 billion in investment interest to Africa. At the Africa Investment Forum, we do deals, deals, and deals. And they are transformational deals. The $600 million securitized finance to support Cocoa Board of Ghana, this president is here, has helped Ghana to grow its cocoa production by 1 million metric tons, with infrastructure for warehousing and cocoa processing. The landmark $24 billion liquefied natural gas project of Mozambique, which was structured and closed at the Africa Investment Forum, is the largest ever foreign direct investment in Africa. It will turn Mozambique into the third largest exporter of natural gas in the world and add $66 billion to its economy. At the virtual Africa Investment Forum held in March of this year, we secured $15.6 billion in investment interest for the construction of the long-awaited Lagos-Abidjan highway. The highway, which carries 75% of the trade in West Africa region, will help to unleash greater growth, trade, and investment across the region. And thank you very much for being here, Your Excellencies, to promote that, and thank you to the President of the ECOWAS Commission. Today, President Alassane Ouattara, President Akufo-Ado, and President Talon will talk and discuss the location of the Secretariat for the project as we get it off the ground. They are the bosses. Whatever they decide, we do. In the next 72 hours, we have curated several investment-ready projects for you as investors. These range from renewable energy hydropower, gas infrastructure, railways, road and water transport. They include agriculture, health, mining, fertilizer manufacturing, port infrastructure, and urban green transport. They include sports, urban housing, and of course, private equity feeder funds. And we have investments targeting women-led businesses. Well, as my dear big sister, President Saleh Ouattara said, it is very important for a woman to believe there is nothing she cannot do. For all the women, business leaders of Africa, yes, there is nothing you cannot do. This forum will strongly support women businesses because the reason is simple. When women win, Africa wins. We have at the forum multilateral and bilateral financial institutions, development finance institutions, commercial banks in Africa and outside of Africa. We are here to send a strong message to you, the investors. We will de-risk investments. We will syndicate financing around investments. We will support your investments all through, from the boardrooms to cutting the tapes to launch your projects. You should have confidence in Africa. As investors, think of the following. Moody Analytics of defaults on infrastructure projects over the last 14 years show that Africa has the lowest default rate on infrastructure projects in the world. 5.5%, compared to Latin America, 12.9%, Asia, 8.8%, Eastern Europe, 8.6%, North America, 7.6%, Western Europe, 5.9%. Give it up to Africa on this, huh? Africa is not as risky as you think. Perception is not the same as reality. The Africa Investment Forum will make investments to land in Africa like a plane on a smooth landing strip. That's why our heads of states and government are here. Africa's heads of state and governments will join you, the investors, in the boardroom sessions as CEOs, chief executive officers of their own countries, to assure you of the policy, legal, and regulatory environment support needed to make your investments work. And quite honestly, this is the only place and the only time you'll ever get heads of states sitting with you in a boardroom acting as CEOs. Please clap for our new CEOs of our world. And so therefore, you have all it takes to succeed with your investments. And I think this is very, very important. Excellencies, heads of state and government, our CEOs are ready. The ministers are ready. The financial institutions are ready. You, the investors, are ready. The Africa Investment Forum is ready. Now, let the deals begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adesina, for having highlighted brilliantly all the positives of the African continent. Now we're going to talk about Côte d'Ivoire, our host country, the country whose economic trajectory is positive and is highly commended by experts. I can confirm that this morning, whilst discussing with delegates who were coming to Côte d'Ivoire for the first time, and some were surprised about what they've seen, the quality of infrastructure, which they were totally unaware of. Because in Côte d'Ivoire, there is a vision, Côte d'Ivoire 2030, and we talk about it almost everywhere. The overriding goals of this ambitious vision, ambitious, yes, but implementable. An economy historically based on export of commodities, which is the case of many African countries, and has moved from an economy driven not only by private investments, but by structural transformation. And that vision, which has been carried by the African authorities, spearheaded by President Alassane Ouattara, who is represented today by the Vice-President Tiémoko Meyliet Koné, whom I call upon to come to the podium.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, Your Excellency, the President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Your Excellencies, the Vice President of Tanzania, Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Liberia, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Mozambique, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Cabo Verde, distinguished heads of the institutions of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. President of the African Development Bank Group, Mr. President of the ECOWAS Commission, distinguished ministers, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished representatives of regional and international organizations, Madam Senior Director of the African Investment Forum, distinguished representatives of the private sector and civil society, honorable chiefs and heads of traditional organizations, members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, His Excellency Alassane Ouattara, would very much have loved to address you in person at this opening ceremony of the third edition of the Africa Investment Forum. But he unfortunately could not do this because of his busy schedule. So, on his behalf, and with his deep regrets, let me welcome you all to this very important event. I am particularly pleased that after the successful editions of 2018 and 2019 in South Africa, our country, Côte d'Ivoire, was selected to host this important get-together in conjunction with the African Development Bank. I would like to welcome the distinguished presence of heads of state, vice presidents, and premier ministers and their delegations, as well as all the participants who have come here to Abidjan. Let me say Akwaba, welcome to you all. I would like to particularly thank the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwunmi Adesina, as well as his entire team for having initiated the AIF and organizing its third edition here in Abidjan. Congratulations, Mr. President of the African Development Bank Group. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to the political and security challenges to peace and stability on our continent, this edition of the AIF is taking place in a global context that is particularly difficult, marked by the baneful effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis in Ukraine and Russia. Indeed, COVID-19 plunged Africa into its worst recession in 50 years. In Côte d'Ivoire, the resilience of our economy, combined with the effectiveness of our response, funded with the support of our partners, including the AfDB, helped us to contain the impact of this crisis. And as such, the growth rate of the Ivorian economy was at 2% in 2020, despite the pandemic, and at 7.4% in 2021. Barely after the challenges of the pandemic, African countries are once again facing external shocks because of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with heavy economic, financial, and social consequences. In fact, our countries are hard hit by increases in fuel and freight charges, together with difficulties in procuring commodities. This has led to generalized inflation at world level, an increase in interest rates on the global markets, and a slowdown in global economic growth. This distant conflict has also led to difficulties in financing our economies in Africa and a reduction in the purchasing power of our people, particularly the most vulnerable segments thereof. In Côte d'Ivoire, the various actions that we have carried out, particularly the subsidies to fuel and basic necessities, made it possible for us to contain inflation to about 4.5%. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the current crisis makes us even more vulnerable in terms of food security. This is paradoxical for a continent which has over 60% of arable land and abundant and young labor or manpower. It is therefore necessary to strengthen the economic resilience of our countries, particularly to external shocks, and ensure our economic and food sovereignty. The theme of this third edition of the Africa Investment Forum, which is building economic resilience through sustainable investments, is definitely in line with this logic. To achieve this, we need to mobilize significant structural investments that take into account our environment, the agriculture, agro-industry, industrial development, infrastructure, and human capital. We also need to grow intra-African trade as required by the free trade area. That is a major opportunity for the continent, with a population that will be 2.4 billion by 2050. In this regard, therefore, the private sector, the linchpin of growth in Africa, has a key role to play. Let me therefore call on the private investors to take on the investment opportunities offered by African countries. As far as Côte d'Ivoire is concerned, these opportunities are outlined in our 2021-2025 development plan to the tune of about 105 billion US dollars, and 3/4 of which are expected from the private sector. They will be presented to you in detail at this forum. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the presence of heads of state and government at this meeting, alongside the various African and international investors, is clear proof of our determination to together create an economic environment that is conducive for the necessary investment to speed up or accelerate the transformation of the African continent. After the first two editions that made it possible to identify an investment volume of $46 billion US and $67 billion US respectively, we dare hope that we will go beyond the $100 billion threshold at this third edition. I remain convinced that several investment and transaction opportunities that will be invested at this forum will contribute to the development of our continent. It is on this note of hope that I would like to end my statement, and on behalf of the President of the Republic, His Excellency Alassane Ouattara, declare open the third edition of the Africa Investment Forum. And I wish you every success. Thank you for your kind attention.
Many thanks, Vice President Tiémoko Meyliet Koné. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly give the Vice President a warm round of applause there. Thank you, Vice President, for bringing that warm statement from His Excellency President Alassane Ouattara. Now, one of the unique features of the Africa Investment Forum is the collaborative meeting of minds at the very highest levels of the public, private, and investment community globally, with one mission, and one mission alone: fast-tracking deals that accelerate Africa's development and create wealth and opportunities for all. With us today are presidents and heads of state from several African countries who have bought into the mission and the essence of the Africa Investment Forum. And as Dr. Adesina said earlier, many of them will be participating in investment boardroom sessions right here at the Africa Investment Forum, as, if we may add, CEOs of their respective nations. It therefore gives me great pleasure to kickstart our presidential conversation by inviting to the platform His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Ado of Ghana, and attending the Africa Investment Forum for the very first time. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Abidjan welcome to His Excellency President Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe as he comes to the platform. Last but certainly not least, Her Excellency President Sahle-Work Zewde of Ethiopia. Your Excellencies, it's great to have you on this platform this morning as representatives of your respective nations and as global ambassadors of the African continent. The presidential panel conversation will center around the Africa Investment Forum and the focus of building resilient economies for the continent. I'm going to kick off this question, but it applies to each one of you. But if you will permit me, I'm going to start off with President Sahle-Work first, and then we'll have your Excellencies respond immediately afterwards. But I want you to take this question because it's key to our conversation. Investors often worry about risks. To your mind, are these risks real perceptions? What are your thoughts on what should we be doing to reduce risk perceptions among investors for Africa in general and then in your country?
Thank you for giving me the floor to be the first one to speak. I'm really happy to be here in Abidjan. I have attended the inaugural forum in South Africa. I would like to congratulate the African Development Bank and its president, my junior brother, for the success that the momentum that this forum has gained. So you talked about risks. And I understand that when we are gathered here with investors and us representing our respective governments, this issue would be raised. But I'm asking the question if there is anything which is risk-free in whatever we do. I think it's important to have that in mind, and that there is also opportunities in the midst of challenges, as it has been said earlier, and I think I'm well placed to say it, coming from Ethiopia. It's important that we understand clearly the nexus that exists now between peace, security, and development. I don't think there is any situation where everything will be perfect for investors to come. And so this has been said time and again in many gatherings, but I think it has to sink in more so that we really understand that there is the linkage between the two. There is no perfect situation, to my view. And the other point I would like to raise is that there is always returns with investment. Investment is risk, in fact. Risk is linked to returns. And returns are not immediate, they are long-term. So this has also to be taken into account when we talk about risks. This is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Zewedi. Nothing is risk-free, and investment itself is a risk. President Akufo-Ado, again, looking at the global picture as far as Africa is concerned, and also for Ghana, what are the perceptions? How can we reduce the perceptions of risk concerning investments on our continent? And the reason why I ask this question is because we've been saying for many, many years that Africa is open for business. That's been a mantra that we've heard for well over 20 years. We're still talking about it today. Should we?
First of all, I want to thank you and the African Investment Forum for inviting me once again to come and participate in your affairs. I was at the first one in Johannesburg.
Absolutely.
I think, what is it, 4 years ago, 2018. And I appreciate, and we in Ghana appreciate very much that you continue to have faith in us by inviting me here again. I believe the question you've asked is really the one that goes to the center of everything that is happening in our continent. There's something which is called the African premium risk, which is become a big obstacle for people wanting to put their money in our continent. Because behind it is the concept that somehow investing in Africa is a riskier undertaking than investing elsewhere in the world. And that is what has propelled a great deal of the difficulties that the continent is going through now. The global economic environment is difficult. All of us are aware of that. We're also aware, unfortunately, that it has provided an opportunity for a lot of capital to flow out of Africa back to the developed world, especially with the Federal Reserve's board policy on the dollar, which is leading to a great deal of difficulties for many of the currencies in our part of the world. But at the heart of it is this perception that investing in our continent is a risk. And yet, the continent has an excellent record as far as default on loans are concerned. It has an excellent record in terms of return on investments. Dr. Adesina indicated that in his very enlightening speech. The areas of concern to the world. The resources are in Africa, whether we're talking about regenerative agriculture that is going to help us deal with climate change. Our continent provides the biggest opportunity for it. We have the world's largest set of arable land, and we go about it properly. The decarbonization of the world, which is now one of the major issues confronting our generation, will be better addressed through the African continent than anywhere else in the world. So we have all of these matters which bring together, provide a very different image of what investing in our part of the world represents than the standard one which has led to the creation of the African premium risk. And my appeal to the investor community that is seen here is, yes, there are problems, there are difficulties, there are major challenges, but long beyond the challenges of what the future holds. You're dealing in a continent which in less than 25 years' time is going to account for 1 in every 4 people on the universe. That's a huge demographic dividend that needs to be taken advantage of. 75% of the population that I'm referring to are going to be people under the age of 35. So you've got dynamism, you have opportunity, you have longevity in investments, which is guaranteed by this population. I think that if you put all of these things together, and of course, the very, very significant efforts being made by African governments to create a proper regulatory, legal and regulatory environment to incentivize investment as well as protect investments on the continent. We have a mix that potentially could be very dynamic for people who are prepared to take the risk. There are $3–4 trillion of investable capital in the private sector floating in the world. Even a percentage of that, 1, 2, or 3% of that, coming onto the African would be transformative for the African economy. And we will then be creating a different paradigm, a paradigm which has to do with people growing prosperous together, rather than the paradigm that the world has accepted in the last, for as long as we can remember, where parts of the world are wealthy and other parts have to be poor in order to sustain the wealth of the others. I think that that paradigm is part of the reason where we are today. A different paradigm has to be looked at, one which we're talking about shared prosperity, shared growth, shared development. And that is particularly the image that appeals to us in Ghana. But these are some of the statements that I
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate that input. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, kindly forgive me. This is a function not of the heart, but of the head. I would be remiss if I did not invite VP Koné to join us on the platform so that we can get the buzz and the feel of the spirit of Côte d'Ivoire. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly give Vice President Koné a warm round of applause to the platform. Mr. Vice President, we're going to come to you in just a few moments, so we'll give you some time to set the stage for us. Again, dealing with the very same question, but I'd like to go to President Mnangagwa right now for your input in this regard. It's an important question for every single one of us, but just before you respond, there's a database called GEMS, Global Emerging Market Risk Data, and it was developed actually by the African Development Bank, and it has been endorsed by the G20. And essentially what the study says, looking at financial capacity, it says they want to see this data published much more widely as a public good, given the huge implications it has for African countries to attract investment. What they're saying is that
the perceptions of risk do not equate to the realities on the ground. Mr. President, you're very familiar with these perceptions, especially given the peculiar circumstances in Zimbabwe. We want to hand over the platform to you here for your input.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to express my views on that issue. But first, may I thank the President of the AfDB, Adesina, who did invite me to attend this forum. I'm very grateful. And of course, for the hospitality extended to me and my delegation here in Abidjan, I'm grateful. You are correct to say that Zimbabwe is in a peculiar position with regard to these issues because of our history and our current position in the international arena, where we are an isolated country on the basis that we have stuck our guns to be ourselves and do develop our country with the view that we are a people who have their own priorities determined by ourselves and not by anybody else. That's the first thing. Secondly, perception influences the outside world. Perception and reality do not always meet. There's a lot of misconception about Zimbabwe, especially by the West, just because we've chosen to be ourselves. My view is that first and foremost, each African country, or Africa as a continent, should prioritize what we want and invite investment in the areas we ourselves want. The development of a country should not be determined from outside. It should be an internal priority in terms of the order of development. Is it agriculture? Is it mining? Is it tourism? Infrastructure development? We have to make those choices ourselves. Secondly, before we spend the time addressing the perception of the outside world, I think it is necessary for us as Africa to integrate ourselves, understand ourselves as a continent, share what we have in terms of resources. Africa has abundant resources. It has youthful population. It has now the knowledge that the developed world have traveled a journey of developing their countries. And we are in that advantage that as we wish to leapfrog and develop our respective countries, we should not fall into the similar mistakes which the other countries, the developed countries went through. If we fail to recognize that we need to chart our own development pathway, then we will find that we will be divided. We will look outside Africa when we could have answers within Africa. So it is my view that in particular for Zimbabwe, we cherish collaboration. We cherish to share our challenges with our brothers and sisters on the continent before we look out. So I don't think that the outside world would love to see Africa develop to an extent that we are competitive with them. They would want to see Africa as a source of their raw materials to develop their own economies.
Well,
Hence, I appeal to our brothers and sisters in Africa that God gave us this continent and we must develop it. Yes, we are not going to invent the wheel, but we must make choices which fit our level of development by collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much. We need to prioritize what we want, and we need to collaborate by looking for answers within, but within the context also of a global environment. One of the reasons why we have investors here from all around the world today is because indeed we are in a global village. On this point, I'd like to go over to Vice President Koné for your contributions to this question, because we're going to deep dive into the opportunities that your respective countries provide in the next few moments. Over to you, Vice President.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Modérateur.
Thank you very much, dear moderator. Unfortunately, I did not understand the question as you formulated it. Could you please repeat it?
One of the drawbacks against investing in Africa, and it's been a narrative that has lasted for almost 20, probably 30, even 40 years, that the risks are too many. But the reality is, as we hear on the platform, and as many have said, that the realities of risk are much lower than the perceptions, particularly by global investors. What's been Côte d'Ivoire's experience in this regard, in terms of perceptions of risk here in Côte d'Ivoire?
Bien, je vous remercie.
Thank you. I think you've somewhat covered the answer I'm about to give. The risk perception, I believe, generally speaking, has evolved from the perspective of investors, and maybe not for Côte d'Ivoire specifically, but more generally, because this risk perception was probably related to a shortfall in governance necessary for advances in development. And I think that all of our countries currently are enjoy better governance, and they comply with shared standards in terms of prospects, and therefore they are able to prosper much like any other countries. Secondly, in the case of Côte d'Ivoire specifically, and I believe that maybe some of you have noted this, much effort has gone into building a growing consensus in the country so that the country can grow in such a way as to support its development as a whole, or broadly speaking. There's obviously engagement and willingness to really be part in constructive dialogue, spearheaded by His Excellency the President of the Republic, and a great focus on development. Obviously, other important aspects are there as well: social dialogue, political dialogue as well, which, because I think that what we need primarily is calm, is allaying concerns and working together hand in hand for towards development for all citizens. Risks come from other parts or from other sources. They're not necessarily foreseen or are not necessarily controllable. So, for instance, the war in Ukraine is a risk. It's not a risk that's endogenous to our countries. It did not originate from our countries, but we have to contend with these risks and overcome them. The pandemic as well was a risk at some point in time. It was not intended, but it was imposed upon us, and we've had to grapple with it. And therefore, we chart our course using the ways and means and to enable us to overcome these risks or circumvent them, finding the most adequate solutions. So risks relating to investments should not only be seen within countries, but more generally related to circumstances that have an impact on implemented policies. These are the risks, I think, and I think that investors should be reassured. The risk that maybe we focused on a few years ago are no longer there and have changed, and therefore that they can trust our countries a lot more. Risks are global, and all the measures are undertaken to overcome them. This is what I'd say in response.
Much, Vice President Koné. Risks are global. As I said, we're going to do a deep dive into the opportunities that your countries do present. Here with us in the audience today, we have institutional investors, investors from all over the world and all across Africa, listening in, also online, and asking themselves, why should I invest in your respective countries? As the CEOs, as the chief ambassadors of your nations, what would you be saying to the investors right now about what the key priority areas of investment are and why they should be investing in your country? I'm going to start with President Akufo-Ado first.
Thank you very much once again. President Mnangagwa made a statement. He said, we're not inventing the wheel. There are areas of priority for each of our individual countries, as well as for the continent as a whole, which in some ways, if I may say, are obvious. Clearly, infrastructure needs in Africa are absolutely priority. The connections within our countries and across our countries are not what they should be in terms of roads, in terms of rail infrastructure, even aerial infrastructure. So the investments that are required in the area of infrastructure are obviously priority. The sooner we can link up our countries and link up our continent, the clearer a market we will have, which therefore becomes very investor-friendly. The ADB has made all sorts of estimations as to the deficit in infrastructural development on the continent. And I believe the figure is that we need $130 to $170 billion annually for the next 3 to 4 years until 2025 to be able to try and bridge the gap for infrastructural development. So that is one clear area where you can see the priority and the necessity for us to be able to attract the investment necessary. Obviously, another extremely important area is education. If we're going to have a 21st century workforce, we have to have an educational system that is geared towards creating 21st century people who have a mastery over the digital process, people who have an educational system that is geared towards producing engineers, scientists, technologists. STEM education is the education of today and the education of tomorrow. So education is clearly another area. A third and obvious area, of course, is our health infrastructure, which is clearly deficient in many ways, both in our various countries and across the continent as well. In Ghana, for instance, at the height of the pandemic, we discovered a fact that was really quite frightening, which was that virtually half of the districts, administrative area, units in our country had no district hospitals. Our country is organized around districts. We have 260 districts in the Ghanaian state, a population of 31 million. And some 102 had no district hospitals at all. It was an alarming fact that came to my attention. So we created what we now call Agenda 111, which is to build, within these next 2 years, 111 hospitals to fill this gap. And that process has begun. Investment in that exercise was something that would be very welcome for us. So we look at education, we look at health, we look at infrastructure, and obviously, as I said in my first remarks, the investments that will enable us to address climate change.
And we'll come to that in just a moment, Mr. President.
Okay.
But thank you very much. 3 excellent areas there. Infrastructure that links our continent, education, creating a 21st century workforce for 21st century opportunities, as well as
the world-class health.
World-class
health
infrastructure.
Health infrastructure.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. President. And we're going to come over to President Emerson Mnangagwa. You're next, sir.
Yes, I will look at Zimbabwe. Why would one want to come and invest in Zimbabwe? Yes, we are a small country with a small population, but God blessed our country with lots of resources. Currently, we are 21 years with sanctions imposed by the West on us. The intention was to cripple our economy and have regime change. To a great extent, they succeeded in collapsing our economy, but we decided to look inwards and depend on our own domestic resources to survive. And we have done that. And currently, our economy is on the growth trajectory. Instead of continuing to go down, it is now growing. And we are focusing on growing it on the basis of internal resources which we have. So we would want investments to come in. But as a result of the perception that Zimbabwe is under sanctions, many investors shun our country. There's a perception of political issues in the country, economic issues in the country, but I would like to assure investors that we are politically stable. We are a very peaceful country. On the continent, we are one of the highest literate nation on the continent in terms of education. It is necessary that as we develop, as my brother said, connectivity, we need to have roads, infrastructure which talk to each other with neighbors and with regions. We need to have railway systems which are able to talk to each other in terms of our neighbors, as well as with the region in Africa, as well as the air linkages between us and the rest of Africa. At the time of our independence, for instance, because we're a British colony, if we wanted to come to Ghana, which is a former British colony also, we first have to go to London and then come back to Africa, to Accra. And when we go back to London to report, and then we go back to Harare. That was stupid. So we need to have internal connectivity as Africa. We have decided that most importantly, food security is primary. And we focused and developed mitigation against climate change in our country. For instance, now for the rest of the history of our country, we're importing wheat from Ukraine or Russia. But because we felt that it is necessary under the circumstances that we should build dams, develop irrigation in our country, we now have adequate wheat for ourselves and surplus. And the same with regard to grain. As a result of developing our own and having internal focusing on the abundant arable land which we have, we are secured. We are now a food security country. And that's what we should do. We have minerals. In the past, all our minerals go out, but we have now focused on the issue of beneficiation of our minerals. Also, even in the agricultural sector, processing, we are developing that. Just as an example, when the pandemic, this pandemic, COVID-19, attacked us, because we are a country under sanctions, we did not receive anything from the global West to support us on mitigating the impact of COVID-19. We looked inwards, and there are very some resources from other infrastructure development to develop our own resilience and acquire vaccines. For instance, the issue of medical oxygen. We could not access medical oxygen, so we assembled some of our young scientists, young girls and young boys, and within 9 to 12 months, we were able to produce our own medical oxygen. And now Zimbabwe uses about 150 tons of medical oxygen a month, but we are now producing that amount in a week. So you can see that if we look at the potential of our own young people, we can do a lot to have our countries solid in terms of being self-dependent and benefiting from the Africa continental trade area.
Thank you.
It is critically important.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Zimbabwe is on the rebound. It is politically stable, has a highly literate population. We need to focus on internal connectivity and focus on food security as well as the younger population. I'm going to come to President Zeudi here. Again, you've just heard President Mnangagwa speak about food security in Zimbabwe, as well as the successes that they've had with wheat. Your country on the continent probably has one of the greatest success records in this regard. What would you consider to be your priority areas for investment in the country?
Thank you very much. You know, usually our priorities overlap, obviously, because at the end of the day, it's the growth of the continent that we are looking at. I will start, because you're leading me to that, with this success story that we are having in Ethiopia, and I think it's the best place to talk about it because we have benefited from the African Development Bank greatly. This is the wheat production, which was not very common in Ethiopia. But we have benefited from the TAAT, TAT, yes, technologies for African agriculture transformation. And now we are in the process of being obviously self-sufficient, but also a net exporter. There is a great potential that we have seen. And I would like to really thank for the AfDB and its president for the support that you have gotten in that regard. It's important to say because we've seen that when there is a problem or people are fighting in another hemisphere, Africa is hungry. Africa doesn't have fertilizer. We should be in a position to consume what we produce, and boosting production is very important, and we have seen it in the wheat production. As far as the priorities of Ethiopia are concerned, I must say that since 2018, there has been a major shift in direction in terms of investment, policies in attracting foreign investment, domestic and foreign investment. There are some areas that we have put as priorities now, and quickly, this would be agro-processing. Agriculture employs 80% of our population. It contributes to 90% for currency exchange, contributes to 40% to the GDP. So agro-processing is very important, as it is to many countries. Mining is the new area that we are engaged in. I mean, we have not heard the last word of what Ethiopia has in terms of mining. We keep on discovering every single day. And this is an area that we want to push forward and really use properly. Tourism, because Ethiopia has a mixture of tourism opportunities, historical, cultural, now the conference tourism, and so on. And there is a huge potential both for domestic and foreign tourism as well. The IT, of course, this digital area. And I would also mention manufacturing, because as many countries in Africa, we're producing our raw materials. Of course, infrastructure is of great importance. I would like to mention the rail, the link between Addis and Djibouti, and also the road, which has been lagging behind for quite so long between Ethiopia and Kenya. We want to boost trade in export. We have this experience of industrial parks that we are pushing forward. So far, the progress is promising. Actually, we have 13 public industrial parks and 7 private parks. We can have a totally private industrial parks as well, so within which we can process many of the activities that I have mentioned. So we want to make use of the vast mineral resources and diverse resources that we have, and that will be the priorities in the 10 years plan that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Zewde. Agro-processing, mining, tourism, industrial parks, manufacturing. And I just want to say to our audience here, just as you heard, listen to President Zewde here, the success that the country has had in the area of wheat self-sufficiency has taken place all within a span of 4 years. In other words, whatever we set our minds to do, we can achieve in Africa. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you.
Again, Vice President Koné, over to you. What are the key priority areas for Côte d'Ivoire?
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que je l'ai dit tout.
Thank you. As I suggested earlier, Côte d'Ivoire's vision is embodied in our development plan, which sets out both strategies but also policies. So much like all other developing countries, some of the key priorities are infrastructure. Infrastructure provide the foundation for economic development, which is absolutely necessary. One of the other priorities, and there are numerous, another priority relates to processing of our own outputs, so processing of goods for exports, but also for local consumption. This is a crucial factor which grows economies and enables us to reduce our dependency on other markets or on imports. And I think that we have been able to achieve quite some success in food stuff such as wheat and other products that are neither produced nor consumed locally. So policies are also important. Economic development is only possible with buy-in from the population. So a key focus for Côte d'Ivoire is involving youth in production and populations in production and in the economy, women as well, and the empowerment of women is another cornerstone of the strategy that we have been implementing in Côte d'Ivoire. Another key area to keep in mind are our policies, so social support policies, particularly, we have, for instance, a program with a special focus on social aspects, and social priorities aimed at improving the living conditions of our citizens so as to enable them to be in the best conditions to produce, to contribute both collectively and individually to the economic development of our country. So there are a variety of different actions to this, or activities to this effect, and I'm sure that we will be discussing some of these in subsequent panels. But I think that what's noteworthy here is that generally speaking, this economic vision has enabled us to achieve some good results, both in terms of our output, our production. There's been significant increases, such as peanuts, or groundnuts, or cashews. We started with 200 to 300,000 tons and increased that output to more than 2 million tons. This demonstrates that with infrastructures and with the engagement and support of producers, you are able to achieve some very good outcomes. And what's important is to grow infrastructure, to support the economy, to foster youth involvement, and promote production factors, and also and especially to ensure that the economy stays on a upward growth trend for the benefit of society at large. Obviously, we can delve into much more detail, like highlighting the various actions and strategies, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Koné. Actually, I'm going to take you up on that. As Dr. Adesina said earlier in his speech, he says, when women win, Africa wins. And to that, we should be able to add, when the youth win, Africa wins. This being the case, let's get into the practical details here. What is it that you're doing to improve the investment environment for women and youth as drivers of Africa's economic future in your respective countries? 1 minute each, and then we'll go to our last question. And I'll start with President Mnangagwa first. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
In that regard, we have about 17 state universities. And each state university, we have introduced innovation hubs, where our young people, girls and boys who are talented, can express themselves, which is funded by government. As a result of that, almost every month we register new patents. So this is critically important to make sure that we have our people build confidence in themselves, because they must develop their own country.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And President Nana Akufo-Ado, I will come to you next.
We have several institutions that are of big significance. We have a Ghana Enterprises Agency that is doing a lot of work in mobilizing resources for young people as well as for women in enterprise. We're about to launch a 10 billion CD investment in something we call the Youth Start program, which is a fund that is going to be available to young people, especially young women, to start up enterprises. We think that the enterprise culture is absolutely critical for our future. So our focus is creating a culture whereby young people, young women, attracted to doing things for themselves and building enterprises. And these two public agencies, the Ghana Enterprises Agency as well as the Youth Start program, are dedicated specifically for that. I believe that a lot of results are going to be seen already. During the pandemic, for instance, the Ghana Enterprises Agency was able to mobilized quite a lot of resources to support women in business, to support young people in business, which paid off a lot of dividends for us and also obviously for our own social stability and coherence.
Excellent, excellent. Some exciting developments here happening for more than 1.2 billion youth on the continent. Almost 70% of Africans below, almost 70% of the population is below the age of 30. This is very, very welcome news. President Zewde, I'm going to come to you next for what it is that you're doing in Ethiopia to, again, unleash the potential of women and youth in your own country.
Yes, thank you very much. I fully agree that when women win, then Africa wins. We have to believe in it. In Ethiopia, we have set the bar high because we have had 50% cabinet women, high positions held by women, and I'm one of the examples of that, the product of that. So it's inspiring. We can't go back, but just moving to that direction. We're trying to make sure that the door of opportunity open to some of us would remain open to the others. And for this to happen, there is a lot that is being done at the level of universities in order to support women who come to the workforce, about to come to the workforce, in terms of training, mentorship, supporting them in their new ideas when they go to the workplace. Same applies to the youth. The proportion is the same. We have 70% young people, and many incentives are being created for them to have, startups in many sectors, and so we really encourage them. Policies have been put in place in order to give that advantage to the two groups, women and a young population. Obviously, mathematically, it's very difficult to move forward if we don't have half of the population and 70% of the population. So this is a big focus for the government currently. Thank you.
Vice-President Koné, again, the question to you, what is it that...
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying that with respect to gender, efforts have been made in Côte d'Ivoire to enable women. As I said, we're in a process of empowerment, which is very strong. Generally speaking, all our policies, we've made sure that access to positions is open to women, access to high levels of responsibility, access to training, access to bank loans, access to financing to develop income-generating activities. All these are embedded in our policies. For young people, I can go a bit further. The basis, the cornerstone, is training. It has a base on solid training. The number of universities has increased in Côte d'Ivoire. The number of training institutes has also increased in Côte d'Ivoire with the construction of a lot of schools, training institutes where young people are trained. The specificity lies in the fact that importance has been increasingly given to the quality of training and education, which has culminated in the establishment of excellence, schools of excellence, where the best are sent to for specialized training, and this affords them the opportunity to access all levels of training globally. But that's not the only thing that has been done. It's entrepreneurship, because young people have to be helped to acquire entrepreneurial skills. there is a well-targeted policy to facilitate access to SMEs, to enable young people to get involved in economic activity and support economic activity. Of course, as you're aware, the results are being seen everywhere, and in the development plan of Côte d'Ivoire, there's an important section dedicated to training for young people and making sure young people are taken care of, the integration into economic activity, and then the second opportunity given to young people who have not been able to go very far in education. So it is vocational and technical training is offered. Now, this specificity we have is that these young people, getting them involved in areas of production, and this is being led by professionals who are helping young people to get into the realm of production. This is extremely important. This is, in a nutshell, it is an important factor. And we've seen integration of women, and this is so important because the number of women-led businesses has grown significantly. This is what I would want to say. I think this is a policy we can elaborate a bit more on in subsequent sessions. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, again, excellent initiatives, proactive engagement all around. Zimbabwe, investment hubs and patents. Ghana, the Enterprises Agency. In Ethiopia, building human capacity through universities and other vocational institutions. Same for Côte d'Ivoire, as well as schools of excellence for the young and for women. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly give our panel a very, very warm round of applause in this regard. We're going to close the session right now, but I'm going to give Your Excellencies the opportunity as the chief investment officers of your country to speak to our audience, both in the auditorium and online, and do just one thing. What is the most important message you want them to take away from this forum today? Again, I'm going to start on the other end with Vice President Koné, and I'm going to make my way back here and end with President Akufo-Ado. Vice President Koné, what is the most important message? Again, 1 minute each. This is your elevator's pitch here. As we're all familiar with speed dating, we're going to do speed dating in terms of investment right now. What's the compelling case you're going to make for your country and for the investors here in the auditorium and online? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think the key message to investors is that Africa is changing. A lot of things are happening in Africa. Africa is moving ahead. And it's important not to lag behind in this global movement in Africa. In Côte d'Ivoire, we have plans for more than 430 billion in terms of investments. And we want investors to come in and help with the implementation, full implementation of our development plan. And what is valid for Côte d'Ivoire is valid for all African countries. Africa needs to change, and we have to be part of that change.
Thank you, Vice President Koné. President Zeudi, you're next.
I'll speak in French.
I think that I thank you for this question, which is very important. At the end of the forum, again here in deference to the host country, or as we say I think we need to change the perceptions on Africa, how we see Africa, Africa which is lagging behind, that image of Africa where there's hunger. That's a thing of the past. It's a continent that is changing, and we also need to participate in that movement. And we should also change the narratives around the continent and avoid this continent always being presented on the negative side and focusing always on what is not working well, whereas most things are working quite well. I think we need to change this paradox from a rich continent which has a lot of future, which has a lot of resources, endowed with a lot of resources, and yet with a poor population. The onus is on us to do so with the help of investors, national and international investors. The last point I want to repeat that there's always an opportunity amidst all the challenges. Peace and security can only be maintained if we also have investments and that we make progress in development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Zeudi. And next, President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Those who want to make money, Zimbabwe is open for business.
I like that.
Secondly, Zimbabwe has undertaken comprehensive economic reforms to create an economic environment where global capital feels safe. Third, we have a labor force that is highly educated and it can adapt to any skills or technologies that can be introduced. Fourth, Zimbabwe is desirous to leapfrog its economic development to integrate with the rest of Africa in the march to develop and modernize and industrialize our continent. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Last but certainly not least, President Akufo-Ado.
Well, I think that, first of all, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this forum. But the basic facts, what? They say 30% of the world's remaining minerals are on our continent. 65% of the world's arable land is in Africa. Over the last 30 years, the rate of return on investments in Africa has been higher than in any other region in the world. And critically, in the last 2-3 years, we've made a decision on this continent that can transform the economic fortunes of our continent. And that is the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is now going to be the main vehicle for trading amongst ourselves. That has been one of the major structural problems that the continent has had, that unlike in other parts of the areas of the world where a lot of economic activities inwardly directed, 70-75% of the GDP of the European Union comes from intra-European trade. Our figures were different. But with the existence of the African Continental Free Trade Area, we now have an opportunity to break that structural obstacle. And I believe that in that, we have potentially a major game changer for the development of the continent. As far as I'm concerned, our message is the smart money is in Africa. Take advantage of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I really think we can do a whole lot better than that for our distinguished panelists. Again, in those final comments, we have a lot of loaded information here that we can unpack. First of all, that Africa is changing. We need to change those perceptions and the narrative, substitute negativity with a narrative of possibility and opportunity. As well, President Mnangagwa has thrown the gauntlet to your other colleagues here, saying Zimbabwe is open for business.
I believe that other presidents will say the same about their own countries also. And finally, with the final comment here, the smart money is on Africa, and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will become the main vehicle for transforming Africa's fortunes. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into that in our next session. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, kindly give a warm, warm round of applause to our distinguished panelists, His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Ado of Ghana, President Emerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe, President Sahle-Work Zewde of Ethiopia, and Vice President Tiémoko Koné. Excellencies, thank you very much for your wonderful contributions. It's been a wonderful joy having you on the panel. We've just heard quite a bit from the presidents of Ghana, of Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and Vice President Koné of Abidjan. So we're going to follow up from where we left off. Let's again take a deep dive and begin with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. What is it that we must do to unleash the potential of the trade area? What is it that's left to be done next on the African Continental Free Trade Area in order, again, to unleash Africa's potential and attract investments onto the continent? I'm going to start with the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire first, His Excellency Patrick Achi, to get the ball rolling. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I'd want to thank the African Development Bank for accepting to organize this third edition after South Africa. This is an important event which brings together the private sector, project developers, with a view to working out concrete deals over and beyond the discussions we're going to have here for a couple of days. It is a unique opportunity. I want to commend President Adesina for this laudable initiative. To get into the issues, the African Free Trade Area is one of the most important policies, and it's extremely important. We should look at it in terms of markets. By 2050, will be 2.4 billion inhabitants. It's going to be one of the largest markets in the world. By 2100, we're talking about over 4 billion people. So the purchasing power of our population growing. So the most important market will undoubtedly be Africa's market. In addition to the market, we should talk about the potential. 60% of this population will be young people, whereas in the world will be an aging population, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. So it's a huge potential in terms of talent, in terms of capacity, which no other continent is blessed with. Is a huge potential that we need to unlock. One of the most difficult factors that will be difficult to manage is about infrastructure, because as you're aware, growth is done with trade, and trade cannot be done. And if trade is not done, it's very difficult to unlock this huge market and take full advantage of this market. So the major challenge we should be grappling with is about infrastructure, road, air, transportation. And I want to thank President Adesina. In the course of this boardroom, we'll have the opportunity to discuss this Abidjan-Lagos highway, which is one of the most important trade corridors in West Africa. We should also give a lot of importance to South-South cooperation. It's true, we're all in the African continent. We all have evolving differently. We may have the same climate, the same geographical features. Some have adopted technologies at a faster pace. I think this is one of the sectors which we are not leveraging enough. Once we have needs and requirements, we immediately tend to turn to Asia, to Europe, Whereas in Africa, in the southern hemisphere, in other areas of parts of Africa, we have those possibilities. So the Africa Free Trade Area is a unique opportunity to lift these challenges, infrastructure challenges, education challenges relating to unlocking these huge resources, arable land, water, and having an environment which is peaceful. And these two are related. We realize today the deep roots of instability stem from the fact that young people do not always have the capacity to get integrated into the labor force. A young, dynamic labor force which cannot get integrated into the world economy, that is also a breeding ground for instability. This is what I would want to say about the African Free Trade Area, which has a huge potential, and yet we do still have a lot of challenges along the way, including infrastructure, which will require huge financing.
Thank you, Prime Minister Achi. Again, I'll come to His Excellency Ulysses Correa e Silva next. And what we're looking for here are the missing blocks. The policies are in place, the plans are there, the strategies are there. What is it that we need to implement to give life and form and accelerate both development and investments in Africa using the Africa Free Trade Area? What are the missing blocks and what do we need to do?
Thank you. Je vais parler en français.
I speak French. I'm coming from a country, an archipelago, which is a bit different from countries on the continent. Our connectivity issues are maritime, air connectivity, and in terms of trade, transportation is a critical factor, maritime and air transport. Let me begin by saying that the perception of risk should also be addressed by confidence, inducing confidence in macroeconomic stability, political and social stability, so that this perception and narrative can change. Africa has a lot of potential among young people. Young people need education, training, developing entrepreneur's spirit. We have a lot of talent. We have the experience in Cape Verde. We need to transform our human resource base. This is a key element. Connectivity is also a key challenge. We have a lot of potential in terms of economic transactions, but this has been constrained by problems of connectivity. Trade, intra-African trade is very low, yet we have a huge development potential. Now, the financing systems, there is a huge dependence on external sources of financing. We need to reduce dependency on aid. We need to work much more on internal financing capacity. And I must commend the role of the bank with President Adesina very much involved in processes that will create value chains in all sectors. Cape Verde relies a lot on tourism, is one of the main key sectors. We're also planning to work towards a blue economy. We also working on agriculture, fisheries, all these sectors which can contribute to growth and development. I think we also need to focus on gender, on women who have an important role to play, which can help our countries grow. I think the perception of Africa should change. It should now be based on confidence, to make sure that the markets also share this confidence. And I think with confidence, you can achieve a lot of transformations. We have the capacity to build this climate of confidence. Thank you.
Silva will come next to His Excellency the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Philip Mpango. What is it that we need to do with regards to the Africa Free Trade Area, Continental Free Trade Area, to again unleash investments on the continent? Again, I want us to keep our responses short and crisp, because we've got a few other areas that we need to get to in the limited amount of time that we do have. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Well, first, thank you for the invitation, the surprise invitation to join the panel. But secondly, to really thank our hosts, the government of Côte d'Ivoire and the African Development Bank for arranging this very important meeting. I think three things. We need to get the Continental Free Trade Area making by taking action in three areas. One, to remove barriers to movement of people and goods now. We should stop talking. Second, I think we can do a lot as Africans to deal with the transport and power bottlenecks, which are critical for us to be able to trade better. So regional projects like the one we are embarking upon to construct a standard gauge railway all the way from the Indian Ocean into the Democratic Republic of the Congo through Burundi, I think for us is really critical to unlock trade in the Great Lakes region. And third, we have to deal with financial infrastructure so that we deal with currency convertibility and exchange and get the African Central Bank to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Mpango. Again, last but not least, Her Excellency Mrs. Jewel Taylor, Vice President of Liberia. Over to you.
Thank you for this unique opportunity. I think as a female leader, I want to talk about creating more opportunities for women. There's an angle when people talk about financing for women-led businesses, you keep hearing microcredit. And I think that needs to change. It depends on what kind of business a female head of an organization wants. We shouldn't limit women to microcredit because it never helps us to actually grow and develop. The second aspect I'd like to raise is that governments across our continent need to really take the bull by the horn, reduce corruption, reduce the vices that make others not want to come and invest in our continent, and make it easy to trade. And thirdly, we need to change the way we do business. Here in the Ivory Coast, as it relates to the cocoa sector, they've decided that those who want to use cocoa or want to produce or manufacture cocoa must come to the continent. That is another way of bringing capacity to where we are, to increase the capacity of our people and ensure that our raw materials are actually used here on the continent, which gives much more value. And I think we need to protect the indigenous industries. Of course, we are part of World Trade and all of those organizations, but the West protected their indigenous organizations and industries. We need to find a way to do that for the African industries, so we encourage our people to develop what we have and to utilize our resources here on the continent.
Thank you, Vice President. Again, we have run out of time. All good things do have to come to an end. So I'm just going to give you, each one of you, 30 seconds again to do a pitch to a global audience tuning in right now, listening to you. Just one final message from you on why your country should be an attractive destination. And that will be the final word from you. 30 seconds or less just about the amount of time it takes you to go from the first floor in an elevator to the second or third floor. I'm going to start with Prime Minister Achi first. 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. You're really welcome. Maybe going very quickly on the climate change issue. Côte d'Ivoire has held the COP15 this year, and we actually have a huge program against deforestation, against soil restoration that is going to move forward. A pledge gave us now $2.5 billion to deal about this issue, which is a very key issue, not only for our country, but for the whole continent. As far as the question you asked, I think that our country has made a paradigm shift, which is very important, which is that the private sector is really the heart of business. Any country, any government, which is concerned with development, is concerned with raising funds. The fiscal pressure has to be high enough to be able to gain the resources that you need, not only to give the social need the people are asking for, but also the revenue you need to grow. So what I will ask is really, Côte d'Ivoire is the place to be, because there is a political will. The political will is the first step when the private sector wants to go somewhere else. Second, the legal framework is there. Most of the actors actually right now in the private sector has got a very good track records on what has been done. Electricity distribution is privatized, gas is privatized, water is privatized, airport management is privatized. So we are the country where there is private sector developing really well with the government hand-to-hand understanding that we need the private sector. The private sector is the future of the continent, and Côte d'Ivoire is the place to be as far as private sector is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister Achi. And we're going to go next to Prime Minister Ulysses Correa e Silva for a 30-second Cabo Verde 30 seconds.
The reason to invest in Cabo Verde, we have stability, good governance, and open, business-friendly environment for business, have a good location, and we have a government that invests a lot in create good incentives to attract investment in tourism, in digital economy, energy, all the sectors that the investors can do good business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Correa e Silva. And over to you, Vice President Philip Mpango. 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. Tanzania is heaven on earth. And the door is open for investors to come now. Thank you.
I like that. Short, straight to the point. Thank you very much. And over to you, Vice President Jill Taylor of Liberia.
You know, Liberia is the land of liberty. There are many opportunities there, from tourism to agriculture to energy to gold and diamond and coltan. And we have the best tourism sites in our country. In fact, there is a part of Liberia on our shores that is the best place for surfing. There are many opportunities. My President George Mane continues to say, we are open for business. We have a regime that is easy to access and to get involved with us. We want partnerships. Come and join us. You will never be disappointed.
Your Excellencies, thank you very much. A lot of energy in the room here, a lot of competition. Thank you very much for your invaluable contributions. And I want to start first by saying a big thank you to Her Excellency Mrs. Jewel Taylor, the Vice President of Liberia, His Excellency Philip Mpango, the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, His Excellency Ulysses Correa e Silva, the Prime Minister of Cabo Verde, and our host Prime Minister, His Excellency Patrick Achi, the Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire.